All right, we're going to flip the script. I get to ask the questions now of Alec. This is
Uh-oh.
fun. Um, so we were just chatting. There's been a lot of news out there around PayPal recently, where the CEO, Alex Chris, hired a very large ticket, expensive individual for head of content, I believe it was, to help them basically build in public. So curious your thoughts, Alec, around that. And then you've been doing this for quite some time. Curious about like your experiences and your thoughts as it relates to the need for it now these days.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So there's a lot to unpack there. We'll start with the fact that I started building in public just to document my journey as I was learning. I was very much the opposite of technical within enterprise AI, but back in 2016. And I was encouraged to do that by my rock star wife, who's a former journalist, and her sales pitch was really straightforward. She's like, "Look, it can be quite hard to write well because you really got to understand the subject, and this will help you not only build community and compress your learning curve, but it will also likely help you iterate accordingly as the world on LinkedIn and Twitter and other places gives you feedback." And so it's terrifying. It was terrifying. It still is terrifying, right? There's no doubt. There are many, many, many times where by nature, you have to really think through second, third order thinking associated with what you're publishing because you really want to make sure you know what it is that you're talking about. And so for me, I've narrowed the focus exclusively to enterprise AI and have been doing so for a long time, which gives me comfort and confidence. But that being said, I think there are a whole host of considerations, especially the CEO of a publicly traded company, to think through. And I'm sure that they are thinking those things through. But one is it's one thing to think well and to write well, but it's an entirely different thing to find your voice. And the way you find your voice is, literally through iteration. And I think one of the things that's really difficult about that, especially if you're in a position such as being the CEO of a publicly traded company, is you might not realize how difficult it might be to figure out what a community might actually care about hearing from you about, right? You might have, this is tough stuff to say out, to say in general, but the world doesn't need 150,000 chocolate chip cookie recipes, right? Shout out Benedict Evans and his awesome interview with Matt Turk, who I love, great podcast. Google and SEO might have liked that, but the world didn't necessarily need that. And so when you start thinking about building public for real, you really want to start with what is it that I am, maybe either infinitely curious about and or what do I really know a lot about that I might want to build consistently over the long haul a community around. Because if it's not starting there, it's going to be quite difficult for you to keep pace because then it just becomes, let me talk at you, right? Let me market. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's that's awareness, that's top of the funnel type stuff. But to build in public for real is, I think, really tough for a publicly traded CEO just for all sorts of reasons. So I don't know if that answers any of your questions, but that's
Well,
a
yeah, I
rough
mean,
kick thing.
logically, you're going to need help, right? I think so. Even though there's some backlash on this PayPal hire, I think people have been doing stuff in social media and hiring agencies or PR companies for years, so I don't see it being any different. Um, Curious, how do you kind of keep up with all that's going on, and like what's your kind of mode of operation as it relates to you know doing all these different interviews? And I mean, you're talking to some very high intellect people. How do you kind of keep pace with those folks, and then also educate yourself as you go through this?
I appreciate the kind words, Stephen, and I'm going to answer this one as simply, and I'm going to make fun of myself as much as possible here because it kind of makes sense, right? So when I was growing up, as a kid, I was and still am, just a massive sports fan, right? And so I found myself in more or less a management consulting track that stepped into sport and so on and so forth, media, TMT. And one thing led to another, and I remember, the moment in time, and I've documented this in some of my stuff, but I am infinitely curious about all things, artificial intelligence, and I have been for a long time since I was, first kind of switched onto it, call it 2016, but it really happened even earlier than that. And so when you have an infinite curiosity about something, it makes it, super easy to keep pace, because you can't get enough, right? It's like the way most people consume, whether it be sport, for example, like fantasy football. People love that stuff, right? They love it because they love it, right? And they're playing infinite games, or playing the sports themselves, or hanging out with their family and their kids and their friends and whatever. These are infinite games. So for me, I was very fortunate that AI is an infinite game for me. There's no end. There's a beginning. I can describe that, but so that being said, I'm that guy that sits on his couch and reads research reports and white papers on the weekend. I've trained my Twitter AI algo to the nth degree, right? So it comes to me, which is really nice, because the AI community, if you want to know anything about AI and you're not on Twitter, that's bananas. You got to be on Twitter, right? Because that's where it's all. I know X, I'm old school, but so Twitter is a massive source, and you train it accordingly, right? And you got to create your list and engage with the content so it comes to you. Newsletters are a big deal. Podcasts are a huge deal. So, you got to find time for that kind of stuff. But then, over time, it is drinking from the fire hose, but the returns start to compound, right? 'Cause as I mentioned, I was in 2016, I was the furthest thing from technical, and now I am technical, and I hang out, as you say, with a bunch of PhDs, because I think that they're the athletes, man. Like they're the superstars, and I'm just blown away by these people. The stuff going on upstairs, it's bananas. They're so smart, they're so interesting, they see the world in such a different way, and it's awesome. So that's how I do it, right? And I've been also using, and I don't want to reveal too many of the secrets, right? But I do like deploying agents and agentic tools to help with research in particular. That's a very important place to use it. Whether you're thinking, Google Deep Research, and now Claude's got some stuff. Grok is really useful as well, especially in relation to the AI community, right? Because you can, do all sorts of things within that framework, and that's changing and evolving as well. It's relatively new. But yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying, the tools are one thing, but you got to find that thing that you're so, curious about that there is no end. Because there will be someone you will compete with that will have that kind of curiosity, and they're going to eat your lunch, Yeah. It's just the way it goes, So that's how for me.
Sounds like you've been building a little bit, building agents maybe, and maybe some vibe coding a little bit, Alec. Let's see.
Well, Rick Rubin's my man, so anything Rick Rubin's gonna always get my attention. That was a coincidence, which was a really good one, because I love Claude, so it was cool that 1 + 1 = 3. But yeah, man, I shout out Richard Socher, for what I'm about to say, but that guy is a phenomenally talented and serious AI person to follow if you don't already. But so let's unpack that one. So one of the things he said recently, which I thought was so spot on, he's got a way with words, was like, okay, if you want to think about, and he didn't say it this way because he's obviously a hell of a lot brighter than I am and much more meticulous in all these ways that he should be. So I will try my best to describe it. So here's what he said. Here's what I took away from what he said. If you want to introduce digital labor, right, AI agents and things, one of the best things you can possibly do is start to think about really important workflows that are core to whatever it is that you're the challenge you're trying to navigate or opportunity to capitalize, and literally just document all of the workflow, the decisions, the tools, the steps, the techniques, the results, the iteration, all these types of things, and then start to figure out, just like you would if you brought on a new hire, how would you train that new hire, if it's a human, to kind of like delegate that stuff over to the human? Because the agents are just the same, right? So I do a lot of that. And in doing that, I figure out different ways to introduce agentic workflows into my workflows so that I can figure out how to get more leverage in terms of my systems to be able to maximize my focus on the stuff that matters the most to the people that follow me. And that tends to be they want to know my perspective on stuff that I think is super interesting and intriguing. And so therefore, I try to figure out ways to get agents involved to ensure that I'm not spending so much time on stuff that's like tedious and they're better at, enable them to do that so I can then interpret. And that's kind of an abstract way of not really answering your question, but kind of answering your question.
No, smart. It's working for sure with the traction you're getting. So kudos. And curious if your love for AI started pre when we hosted you from IBM standpoint at Think way back in the day, or post? Was that part? I remember we hung out, I think, in Vegas way back in the day when IBM Think was there, or was it San Fran? Maybe San Fran. Can't recall. But,
I think there were both. Both. But so I'll give you the 90-second version. Hopefully it's shorter than that. And because I love the origin stuff. I have a systems orientation. I had no idea what that even meant. When I was in undergrad, I studied finance and philosophy. I studied finance because I thought it would give me optionality, but I thought it was super boring. I studied classics, which is a derivative, I guess, of philosophy, because I stumbled my way into it and it was amazing. And that's what originally was the thing that, if you look back, that was the thing that's like, oh, the guy's got a systems orientation. But I didn't realize that for a long time. And so when I was working for what are now the LA Rams, back when they were in St. Louis, it's a long story, but the short version is we had to evaluate some technology, and being the youngest guy in the room, you know how that goes. A young guy figure it out. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what this is, but okay, I'll give it a shot. And the lightning bolt kind of started to strike. And fast forward to a couple different, stages down the line, I never will forget where I was sitting, in Razorfish's offices when I believe it was UiPath. It could have been Blue Prism. Those two companies might have merged at this point.
Right,
but they walked into the room, and I'm just sitting there, on behalf of the financial services vertical, like, hey, what do you got? What's going on? How can you help our clients and customers? And guy starts to unpack robotic process automation. I was like, whoa, hold on a second. So you're telling me, because the systems orientation started to trigger. Yeah. And I was like, I'm okay, I'm pretty good at being a management consultant, that like I can take things apart, strengthen the parts, put them back together, and And so, but you're saying that your technology can automate different dimensions of process within complex businesses so that humans don't have to do this. And that was it, right? And I literally can see in my mind's eye the conference table I was sitting at, the floor I was on, the office I was in. That was it. So at that moment, and I can time check and date stamp that and come back to you on when you and I were together at an IBM event. But that was the moment, and it was over. From that point on, then it was like, boom. And so that all in from that, I didn't choose it. It chose me, is what I always say. Shout out Igor. He said that as well. Nice.
Yeah, well, it's been a fun journey for sure, and appreciate you letting me ask you the questions. It's been fun. We'll have to do this more often. So thank you, Alec. Appreciate it.
Anytime, my man. Appreciate it.